I
Are you
still remember
serious
the
right now?
exact moment my son looked at me across that polished dinner table
You
and
wore that old
laughed.
thing here tonight.
"Mom, are you really wearing that?" Michael said, shaking his head as his friends smirked. I looked down at my old cardigan, the same one I'd worn for years, and suddenly felt like I didn't belong in my own child's world. I said nothing. I just smiled and
Hello,
swallowed the
Clara.
hurt. But
I
3
know
days
this is
later, a
difficult to
man in a
believe, but we
tailored
have
suit
reason to
knocked on my
believe your
door
son
and
is
said
still
something I
alive.
never expected
We
to
found
hear.
him.
"Mrs. Linda Harrington, you changed my life and my research. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Have you ever been judged by your own family? Tell me how it felt." I read every comment, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'd truly love to hear your story. My name is Linda Harrington, and for most of my life, I never thought of myself as someone worth noticing. I'm 68 years old, widowed for nearly 15 years now, and I live in a quiet little town in Ohio where nothing much changes. The same diner still serves burnt coffee on Main Street. The same hardware store still smells like sawdust and oil. And my house, small white, a little worn around the edges, still stands at the end of Maple Drive just like it has for decades. I've lived a simple life. Not easy, but simple. After my husband Robert passed away from a heart condition, it was just me and my son Michael. Back then, we didn't have much. There were months I had to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying new shoes for him. And I always chose him. I learned how to stretch every dollar. I mended clothes instead of replacing them. I saved leftovers and turned them into new meals. I fixed broken chairs, patched leaking pipes, and reused anything that could still serve a purpose. That old cardigan Michael laughed at, I've had it for over 10 years. I remember buying it from a thrift store during one of the coldest winters we ever had. It cost me $3. The sleeves were a little too long and one button was missing, but I fixed it. I always fix things. That's just who I am. I never saw anything wrong with that. But Michael, he grew up seeing the world very differently. He was always a smart boy, brilliant even. He earned scholarships, went to a good college, and eventually built a successful career in Chicago, working in finance. The kind of job where people wear expensive suits and talk about numbers I can barely understand. I was proud of him. So proud. Every time he called to tell me about a promotion or a bonus. I'd sit in my kitchen holding the phone with both hands, smiling like the sun had just risen inside my chest. "You deserve it, honey," I'd always say. And I meant it. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, it was small things. Michael started calling less often. When he did call, the conversations felt shorter more. "You deserve it, honey," I'd always say. And I meant it. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, it was small things. Michael started calling less often. When he did call, the conversations felt shorter, more distant, like he was always in a hurry, always distracted. "Sorry, Mom, I've got another meeting," he'd say. Or, "Can I call you back later?" Sometimes he did. Sometimes he didn't. Then came Jessica Miller. Now, Jessica Harrington was everything I wasn't. She was elegant, polished, always perfectly put together. The first time I met her, she wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She was kind, in a careful, measured way. "Mrs. Harrington, it's so nice to finally meet you," she said, her smile flawless, her voice smooth. But there was something in her eyes, not cruelty exactly, but distance, like she was observing me from behind a glass wall. I tried not to think too much of it. After all, she made my son happy. That should have been enough. Still, every time I visited them in Chicago, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't quite belong in their world. Their apartment was on the 23rd floor of a building with a doorman and a marble lobby. Everything inside was sleek, and modern glass tables, white furniture, abstract paintings I didn't understand. I was always afraid to touch anything. Once I set my teacup down on the table without a coaster, and Jessica gently slid one underneath it, smiling politely. "Oh, we try to keep the surfaces protected," she said. I nodded, embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," she replied, but her tone made it clear. It wasn't really. Michael noticed those moments too, but instead of reassuring me, he seemed irritated. "Mom, you don't have to apologize for everything he said once running a hand through his hair. I just don't want to mess anything up," I replied softly. "You won't," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Over time, the visits became less frequent. Sometimes months would pass without seeing him. I told myself he was busy, that this was just how life worked when children grew up and moved away. But deep down, I felt it. The distance, the quiet space growing between us. And then there were the comments, small at first. "Mom, you should really think about updating your wardrobe." Or, "People don't really dress like that anymore." I'd laugh it off. "Well, I guess I'm just old-fashioned," I'd say. But each time, something inside me tightened just a little more. I didn't mind being old-fashioned. I minded feeling dismissed. One afternoon during one of his rare visits home, Michael stood in my living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "You still have this couch?" he asked. I glanced over. The cushions were worn, yes, but it was still sturdy. "Of course," I said. "Your father and I bought that when you were 10. Michael sighed. "Mom, you don't have to live like this anymore." "Like what?" "Like you're struggling," he said. "You can afford better now." I smiled gently. "I'm not struggling, Michael. I'm comfortable." He shook his head. "That's not the point." But he never really explained what the point was. To him, comfort seemed to mean something different, something newer, cleaner, more expensive. To me, comfort meant familiarity, memories, things that had lasted. That couch had held my husband when he came home tired from work. It had held Michael when he fell asleep watching cartoons. It had held me through nights when I didn't know how I'd make it through the next day. How do you replace something like that? You don't. You honor it. But I realized then, Michael didn't see it that way. To him, those things weren't symbols of love or resilience. They were just old, outdated, embarrassing. And maybe so was I. I didn't say that out loud, of course. I just smiled the way I always did. "I'm happy, sweetheart," I told him. "That's what matters." He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. And as he stood there in his tailored coat, checking his phone every few seconds, I felt it more clearly than ever before. My son had built a life so far from mine that he no longer understood me at all. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about distance. It doesn't arrive with a loud announcement or a clear dividing line. It creeps in quietly, settling into the spaces between conversations, between visits, between words left unsaid. And before you know it, the person who once needed you for everything no longer seems to need you at all. I started noticing it more clearly the year Michael turned 35. That was around the time he and Jessica moved into a bigger apartment, one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. He sent me pictures on his phone. Everything looked spotless, almost like it belonged in a magazine. "It's beautiful," I told him. "It should be," he replied. We worked hard for this. There was nothing wrong with what he said. But there was something in his tone, something I couldn't quite name. Pride, yes. But also distance. As if the life he had built was something separate from me, something I couldn't fully understand. A few months later, he invited me to stay for a weekend. I remember standing in front of my closet that morning, trying to decide what to wear. I didn't have much, Just a handful of dresses, a few blouses, and the same old cardigan folded neatly on the shelf. I picked a simple navy dress and pressed it carefully. Just look presentable, I whispered to myself. When I arrived, Jessica greeted me at Teehee door with a polite smile. Hi, Linda. I picked a simple navy dress and pressed it carefully. Just look presentable, I whispered to myself. When I arrived, Jessica greeted me at the door with a polite smile. Hi, Linda, she said. She had started calling me by my first name instead of Mrs. Harrington. I wasn't sure when that changed. Hi, Jessica, I replied, stepping inside and wiping my shoes carefully on the mat. Michael came out a moment later, hugging me quickly. Hey, Mom. He smelled like expensive cologne. You look nice, he added after a brief pause. Not warm, not enthusiastic, just polite. I told myself not to read into it. That evening, we went out to dinner at a restaurant downtown. It was the kind of place where the menus didn't have prices listed, and the lighting was so dim, I had to squint to read anything. I held my purse tightly in my lap as we sat down. Jessica ordered confidently, barely glancing at the menu. I'll have the salmon medium and a glass of the Chardonnay, she said. Michael nodded. Same for me. The waiter turned to me. And for you, ma'am, I hesitated. I'll just have the chicken, I said, choosing the safest option I could find. When the waiter left, Jessica smiled. That's a classic choice. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Throughout dinner, they talked about things I didn't quite follow. Investments, business deals, people I'd never met. I listened quietly, smiling when it seemed appropriate. At one point, Michael glanced at my hands. Mom, you're still wearing that ring? I looked down at my fingers. It was my wedding ring. Of course, I was still wearing it. Yes, I said softly. He shrugged. I just figured, I don't know. Most people move on. Jessica shifted slightly in her seat, but didn't say anything. I felt something tighten in my chest. I did move on, I said. I just didn't forget. Michael didn't respond. He simply took a sip of his wine and turned back to the conversation. Moments like that, they stayed with me. Not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they revealed something deeper. A difference in how we saw the world. To Michael, moving forward meant letting go of the past. To me, moving forward meant carrying it with you, honoring it. The next morning, I woke up early, as I always did. I made my way into the kitchen, careful not to make too much noise. The sunlight poured in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble countertops. I noticed a small crack on the handle of one of their cabinets. It wasn't big, just enough that it might break if someone pulled too hard. Without thinking, I reached into my purse. I always carried a few basic tools with me, a small screwdriver, some adhesive things like that. Old habits. I carefully applied a bit of glue and adjusted the handle, holding it in place for a moment. There, I whispered. That should hold. You don't have to do that. I turned around. Jessica stood in the doorway watching me. Oh, it was nothing, I said quickly. I just noticed it was loose. She walked over, examining the handle. We usually just replace things when they're broken, she said. I smiled. Well, sometimes fixing is enough. She didn't smile back. Sometimes, she said, it's just easier to get something new. Her words weren't harsh, but they landed heavier than she probably intended. Later that day, as I packed my bag to leave, Michael leaned against the wall, watching me. Mom, he said, can I give you some advice? Of course. He hesitated for a moment. You don't have to hold on to everything he said. Clothes, furniture, watching me. Mom, he said, can I give you some advice? Of course. He hesitated for a moment. You don't have to hold on to everything, he said. Clothes, furniture, even habits. It's okay to upgrade your life. I zipped up my suitcase slowly. I'm not holding on because I have to, I replied. I'm holding on because I choose to. He frowned slightly. I just don't want people to judge you. I looked at him. People already do, Michael, I said gently. The question is, why does that matter so much to you? He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his phone, his attention already shifting elsewhere. I'll call you a car, he said. And just like that, the conversation was over. On the ride back home, I stared out the window, watching the city fade into the distance. His words echoed in my mind. Upgrade your life. I thought about everything I had kept over the years. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because those things had meaning. They told a story. My story. And yet, to my own son, they were nothing more than signs of something lacking. Something embarrassing. I pressed my hand against the fabric of my cardigan, feeling the familiar softness beneath my fingers. For the first time in a long while, I wondered if maybe he was right. Not about replacing things, but about something else, something much harder to admit. Maybe in his world, I wasn't enough anymore. The dinner where everything changed happened 2 weeks after my visit to Chicago. Michael had come back to Ohio for a short business trip, and he called me the night before. Mom, I'm in town, he said. Let's have dinner tomorrow. There was something different in his voice lighter, maybe. Or perhaps I just wanted to believe that. I'd love that, I said. All day, I found myself preparing in small, careful ways. I cleaned the house even though he wasn't coming over. I cooked a few of his favorite dishes out of habit before remembering we were going out. And then, once again, I stood in front of my closet. This time, I hesitated longer. My hand hovered over that same navy dress, then drifted to the cardigan. I paused. For the first time, I heard his voice in my head. You should really think about updating your wardrobe. I swallowed. Then I picked up the cardigan anyway. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I didn't know who I would be without the pieces of myself I'd carried for so long. We met at a mid-range restaurant just outside of town. Not too fancy, not too casual. The kind of place where families gather after church on Sundays. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately. Michael stood near the hostess stand, checking his phone, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored pants. He looked successful, confident, like someone who belonged anywhere he went. For a moment, I just watched him. That little boy who used to cling to my hand in grocery stores was gone. Mom, he said, when he saw me stepping forward for a quick hug. You look nice. Again, that same word. Nice. Thank you, I replied softly. We sat down, and for a while, things felt normal. We talked about his work, the weather, a few neighbors he remembered from years ago. I told him about the garden I'd been working on in the backyard. The tomatoes are coming in nicely this year, I said. That's good, he replied, nodding absent-mindedly as he glanced at his phone again. Then his colleagues arrived. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed as sharply as he was. Mom, this is Daniel Eric, and Chloe Michael said. They smiled politely. Nice to meet you, Chloe said warmly, extending her hand. You too, I replied, shaking it gently. For a while, the conversation flowed easily. They asked me questions about the town, about how long I'd lived there. I answered as best I could, trying to keep up. Then at some point, it shifted. It started with something small. Chloe complimented Michael. I have to say your presentations are always so polished, she said. You carry yourself like someone who's been in that world your whole life. Michael laughed. Well, I have to say your presentations are always so polished, she said, You carry yourself like someone who's been in that world your whole life. Michael laughed. Well, I had to learn fast. And you did, Daniel added. Not everyone can make that kind of leap. I watched him smile, proud, comfortable. Then Eric leaned back slightly, glancing at me. So, Mrs. Harrington? He said. What did you do for a living? I hesitated. Oh, I worked a few different jobs, I said. Mostly part-time work while raising Michael. What kind of jobs? He pressed. I smiled, a little self-conscious. Waitressing, cleaning, some sewing work, whatever helped make ends meet. Oh, I worked a few different jobs, I said. Mostly part-time work while raising Michael. What kind of jobs? He pressed. I smiled, a little self-conscious. Waitressing, cleaning, some sewing work, whatever helped make ends meet. There was a brief pause. Not long, but long enough. Eric nodded slowly. Got it. Something in his tone made my cheeks warm. I lowered my gaze to my plate. Then it happened. One of Michael's colleagues, Daniel, I think, looked at my cardigan. Is that vintage? He asked casually. I smiled, relieved at the lighter question. Oh no, I said. Just something I've had for a long time. Michael let out a small laugh. And that laugh? It cut deeper than anything else that night. Yeah, he said, shaking his head slightly. My mom has a hard time letting go of things. The table chuckled lightly. Not cruelly, not loudly. But enough. I felt it. Every eye, every glance, every unspoken judgment. I kept my smile in place. I suppose I do, I said gently. But inside something shifted. Chloe, to her credit, leaned forward slightly. I think that's actually kind of beautiful, she said. There's something special about holding on to things that matter. I looked at her surprised. Thank you, I said. But Michael waved it off. It's not about sentiment, he said. It's just beautiful, she said. There's something special about holding on to things that matter. I looked at her surprised. Thank you, I said. But Michael waved it off. It's not about sentiment, he said. It's just practicality. At some point, you have to move forward. His words landed like a quiet verdict. Move forward. The same phrase again. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I listened. I smiled. I said the right things at the right times, but I wasn't really there anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere deep inside myself, trying to understand how the boy I raised had learned to see me this way. By the time we stood up to leave, I felt exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. As we walked toward the parking lot, Michael slowed his pace to walk beside me. Mom, he said, his voice lower now, more private. You were quiet tonight. I was listening, I replied. He hesitated. You don't have to, be so reserved, he said. You can speak up more. I stopped walking. And say what exactly, I asked softly. He looked at me surprised. I don't know. Just be more confident. I studied his face. This man, my son, who thought confidence came from speaking louder, dressing better, fitting in. Michael, I said gently. I've lived a long life. I know who I am. He sighed. I just don't want people to get the wrong impression. And what impression is that, I asked. He didn't answer right away. But he didn't have to. I already knew that I was less polished, less modern, less worthy of the world he had built. I took a deep breath. I'm proud of you, I said quietly. He blinked, caught off guard. Okay, but I hope one day, I continued, you'll be proud of where you came from too. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort, but it passed quickly. Of course I am, he said, And I realized then, he believed that, in his own way. But his version of pride didn't include the parts of me that didn't fit his world. We said our goodbyes shortly after. He hugged me quickly, already glancing at his phone again. "Text me when you get home," he said. "I will." As I drove back through the quiet streets of my town, I felt the weight of the evening settle over me. Not because of what his colleagues thought, not even because of what he said, but because of what it revealed. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own son's story. For a few days after that dinner, I tried to go back to my normal routine. I watered my garden in the mornings. I folded laundry in the afternoons. I watched the evening news with a cup of tea just like I always had. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, something had. It wasn't just what Michael said. It was the way he said it. The way he laughed. The way he looked at me as if I were something he had outgrown. I kept replaying that moment at the table in my mind. My mom has a hard time letting go of things. Such a simple sentence, but it carried so much weight. Because it wasn't just about clothes. It was about me. About everything I represented. The past. The struggle. The life he had worked so hard to leave behind. 3 days later, I received a call from him. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice warm and steady. "I was thinking," he began. "Why don't you come visit again next weekend? Jessica and I are hosting a small gathering. Just a few friends from work." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no, to avoid that feeling again, the quiet judgment, the subtle discomfort. But another part of me still hoped that maybe things could be different. "That sounds nice," I said. "I'd love to." "Great," he replied. "And Mom?" "Yes." There was a pause. Maybe wear something a little more updated. The words were careful, measured, but they still stung. I forced a small laugh. "You'll see what I can do." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then slowly I stood up and walked to my bedroom. I opened my closet, and for the first time in years, I saw it the way he did. The dresses, the blouses, the cardigan, all of it simple, worn, familiar, safe, but also old. I reached out and touched the sleeve of the cardigan. My fingers traced the small stitch where I had repaired it years ago. "I fixed you," I whispered. And in a way, it had fixed me too. It had kept me warm during nights when I felt completely alone. It had been there through grief, through hardship, through every quiet moment of survival. How do you replace something like that? You don't. But still, I found myself wondering, what if just this once I tried? The next morning, I drove to a shopping center about 30 minutes away. It wasn't somewhere I went often. Most of the stores were expensive, and I had never really seen the point. But that day, I walked in anyway. The bright lights, the polished floors, the racks of perfectly arranged clothing. It all felt overwhelming. A young saleswoman approached me almost immediately. "Can I help you find something?" she asked with a friendly smile. I hesitated. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Something nice, I suppose." "For a special occasion," I nodded. "Yes." She looked me over, not in a rude way, but in a way that made me feel assessed. "Let's find you something that makes you feel confident," she said. Confident. That word again. She guided me through the store, pulling out different pieces, dresses in soft fabrics, blouses with delicate patterns. Everything looked beautiful, but none of it felt like me. Still, I tried them on, one after another. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked refined, put together, like someone who belonged in Michael's world. But there was something missing. Something I couldn't quite name. "It looks lovely on you," the saleswoman said as I stepped out in a light gray dress. I nodded slowly. "It does," I admitted, and yet I didn't feel it, but I bought it anyway, along with a pair of modest heels and a small handbag. When I got home, I hung the dress carefully in my closet, right beside the cardigan. They looked so different side by side. One new, one old. One representing the life Michael wanted me to step into. The other, the life I had built with my own hands. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the gathering, about the people I would meet, about the way Michael would look at me. Would he finally approve? Would he feel proud? And then a quieter question followed. At what cost? The day of the gathering arrived sooner than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror wearing the new dress. My hair was neatly styled, my shoes polished. For a moment, I almost felt like I belonged. Then I reached for my cardigan. My hand hovered over it. I could almost hear Michael's voice again. "Maybe wear something a little more updated." Slowly, I pulled my hand back. "No," I whispered, and left it behind. The drive to Chicago felt longer than usual. My stomach twisted with nerves the entire way. When I arrived at Michael and Jessica's apartment, the building looked even more intimidating than before. Tall, perfect, untouchable. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. Jessica opened the door. For a split second, she looked surprised. Then she smiled. "Linda, you look wonderful." There was genuine warmth in her voice this time. "Thank you," I said. Michael appeared behind her, and when he saw me, he paused, just for a moment. Then he smiled. "Wow, Mom," he said. "You look great." Not nice, not polite, but something closer to approval. And for a brief, fragile moment, I felt it, that small, aching hope inside me beginning to rise again. At first, the evening felt different, better, warmer. As guests began to arrive, I stood near the window holding a glass of sparkling water, trying to steady my nerves. The apartment buzzed with quiet sophistication, soft jazz music in the background, low laughter, the clink of glasses. Everyone seemed so at ease. And for once, I didn't feel completely out of place. A few people approached me early on. "Hi, you must be Michael's mom," a woman in her 50s said kindly. "I'm Rebecca. It's lovely to meet you," I replied. She smiled warmly. "Michael talks about you." That surprised me. "He does." "Of course," she said. "He always mentions how hard you worked when he was growing up." Something in my chest softened. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. "Thank you," I said quietly. As the evening continued, more conversations followed. Some light, some polite, some surprisingly genuine. And slowly, I began to relax. Michael moved easily through the room, laughing, shaking hands, introducing people. Every so often, he glanced in my direction, and each time when our eyes met, he smiled. Not the polite smile, not the distant one, but something closer to pride. It made something fragile inside me bloom. Maybe this was what he wanted. Maybe this was all it took. Just a different dress, a different presentation, a version of me that fit his world. At some point, Jessica joined me by the window. "You're doing great tonight," she said softly. I turned to her. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I think Michael just wants people to see what he sees in you." I studied her face. "And what is that?" I asked gently. She smiled faintly. "Strength," she said. "He just doesn't always know how to show it the right way." I let that settle. It was the first time anyone had tried to explain him to me without judgment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. She nodded, then excused herself to greet someone else. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it. That maybe Michael's behavior wasn't rejection. Maybe it was misunderstanding. Then the conversation shifted. It happened when a tall man in a tailored suit approached us, someone I hadn't seen before. "Michael," he said, extending his hand. "Great to finally meet you in person. I've heard a lot." "Dr. Collins," Michael replied, shaking his hand. "Likewise." "Dr. Collins." The name felt important. There was something about the way people subtly turned their attention toward him, something that suggested status. Significance. "Ah," Dr. Collins said, glancing toward me. "And this must be your mother." "Yes," Michael said. "This is Linda Harrington." "It's a pleasure," Dr. Collins said, warmly taking my hand. "Likewise," I replied. He studied me for a moment, not in a judgmental way, but in a curious one, as if he were trying to place something. "I hope you're enjoying the evening," he said. "I am," I answered. There was a brief pause. Then he tilted his head slightly. "Forgive me," he said, "but have we met before?" I blinked. "I don't believe so." He frowned slightly, thinking. "That's strange," he murmured. "You look very familiar." I smiled politely. "I suppose I just have one of those faces." He chuckled lightly. "Perhaps," but something in his expression suggested he wasn't convinced. The conversation moved on, but I noticed something shift. Dr. Collins stayed nearby, watching, observing. As the evening progressed, he joined a small group conversation where Michael was discussing his work. "We've been exploring new materials for energy efficiency," Michael explained. "Lightweight, adaptable, cost-effective." Dr. Collins listened carefully. "And where did you first become interested in that field?" he asked. Michael hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Graduate school," he said. "It really opened my eyes." Dr. Collins nodded slowly. "Interesting." I stood quietly at the edge of the group listening. Something about the question lingered. Because I knew that wasn't entirely true. Michael's interest in materials and fixing things, improving them, making them last. That had started long before graduate school. It had started in our small kitchen, with broken chairs, with worn-out cabinets, with a mother who never threw anything away because she couldn't afford to, and a little boy who watched and learned. "Fascinating," Dr. Collins said. "Because the approach you described, it reminds me of something." Michael smiled politely. "Oh yes," Dr. Collins continued. "A philosophy of repair over replacement. Sustainability not just as a concept, but as a necessity." My breath caught. "That's one way to look at it," Michael said. Dr. Collins turned slightly toward me again. "That's where I've seen you," he said suddenly. The room seemed to quiet just a little. "I beg your pardon?" I asked. He stepped closer, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "I knew it," he said. "You're the woman from the community workshop in Ohio." My heart skipped. "The workshop?" "Yes," he said. "Years ago, you used to volunteer teaching basic repair skills. Fixing furniture, clothing, small household items." I stared at him. Memories flooded back. That little community center? The evenings spent helping neighbors mend what they couldn't afford to replace. Yes, I said slowly. "I did that for a while. Dr. Collins smiled broadly. Incredible, he said. I attended one of your sessions, just once, but it stayed with me. I felt the room shift. People were listening now, truly listening. I was a young researcher back then, he continued, struggling with a concept how to design materials that last longer, that adapt, that can be repaired instead of discarded. He paused, looking directly at me. And then I met you. A strange silence filled the space. You spoke about things differently, he said. Not as theory, but as lived experience. You showed how necessity creates innovation. My hands trembled slightly. I was just trying to help people, I said softly. But you did more than that, he replied. You changed the way I thought. I could feel Michael beside me, still, silent, listening. Dr. Collins turned to him. Your mother's perspective? It became part of my research foundation, he said. In fact, the model we're developing now, much of it traces back to that idea. The room seemed to hold its breath. I looked at Michael, really looked at him. And for the first time that night, he wasn't smiling. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced that night. Not loud, not chaotic, but dense, like the air had thickened around us. I could feel every eye in the room shifting not toward Michael anymore, but toward me, toward the woman in the simple dress, the woman who had just been reintroduced. I'm sorry, I said softly, almost instinctively. I think you might be giving me too much credit. Dr. Collins shook his head immediately. No, he said firmly. If anything, I've never given you enough. There was a quiet intensity in his voice that made people lean in. You spoke about repair, not as a temporary fix, he continued, but as a philosophy of life. You said something that stuck with me all these years. He paused as if searching for the exact words. Then he smiled. Just because something is worn doesn't mean it's worthless. Sometimes it just means it's been needed longer. My breath caught in my throat. I had said that. I remembered the moment now standing in that small community center holding up an old jacket someone had brought in. I hadn't thought anyone important was listening. I hadn't thought anyone would remember. The room was completely still. I built an entire research framework around that idea, Dr. Collins continued. Adaptive materials, self-repairing systems, sustainable design. He gestured lightly toward Michael. And your son here has been doing remarkable work applying those concepts. A ripple of impressed murmurs moved through the group. I turned slowly toward Michael. His face had changed. The confidence, the easy charm, it was gone. In its place, something more complicated, something unsettled. I didn't realize he said his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Dr. Collins looked at him with a hint of surprise. You didn't know? He asked. Michael shook his head slightly. No, he admitted. I didn't. And that was the moment everything truly shifted. Because it wasn't just that he hadn't known, it was that he had never asked. Dr. Collins turned back to me. You may not remember me, he said gently. I was just another face in that room. But you gave me something invaluable that day. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I was just trying to help people fix what they had. You may not remember me, he said gently. I was just another face in that room. But you gave me something invaluable that day. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I was just trying to help people fix what they had, I said. And you changed how I saw the future, he replied. The weight of his words settled over me slowly. Not like a sudden shock, but like something unfolding, something long overdue. Around us, the conversation began to pick up again, but differently now. People weren't just being polite. They were curious, interested, respectful. "So you taught repair workshops?" Rebecca asked, stepping closer. "Yes," I said, "for a few years, mostly for people who couldn't afford replacements." "That's incredible," she said. "That kind of thinking is exactly what we need more of." Another guest chimed in. "It's actually very aligned with current sustainability trends." I nodded politely, but my focus had shifted. I was watching Michael. He stood there silent, listening, processing. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure of himself. Jessica moved closer to him, her expression soft but thoughtful. Michael. He stood there silent, listening, processing. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure of himself. Jessica moved closer to him, her expression soft but thoughtful. "Michael," she said quietly, "you never told me that." He didn't respond right away. "I didn't think it mattered," he said finally. And there it was, the truth. Not cruel, not malicious, but deeply revealing. It didn't matter. Not to him. Not until now. Dr. Collins studied him for a moment. "Well," he said gently, "it matters more than you think." There was no accusation in his tone, just clarity. Michael nodded slowly, but his eyes flickered toward me. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not pride, not approval, not even confidence, but something far more fragile. Regret. The conversation eventually moved on, but the energy in the room had changed completely. People approached me differently now. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. They asked about the workshops, about the people I helped, about the techniques I used. And as I spoke, I realized something. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to fit into their world. I was simply telling my story. And somehow, that was enough. More than enough. Later in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, I stepped out onto the small balcony for some fresh air. The city lights stretched endlessly in front of me, bright, sharp, unyielding. For a moment, I just stood there breathing, trying to process everything that had just happened. "You okay?" The city lights stretched endlessly in front of me, bright, sharp, unyielding. For a moment, I just stood there breathing, trying to process everything that had just happened. "You okay?" Michael's voice came from behind me. I turned. He looked different. Not polished, not composed, just human. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, stepping closer. There was an awkwardness between us now, a space that hadn't been there before. Or maybe had always been there, and we were only just noticing it. "I didn't know," he said again. "I know," I replied gently. He looked down at his hands. "I mean, I knew you did those workshops. I didn't think—" He trailed off. "That it mattered?" I finished for him. He winced slightly. "I guess, yeah." I studied him quietly. "I didn't do it to be recognized," I said. "I did it because people needed help." "I know," he said quickly. I didn't connect it to this." He gestured vaguely toward the inside of the apartment, toward the world he had built. "The work you're doing," I said softly. "It didn't come from nowhere, Michael." He swallowed. "I thought it came from school, from training, from everything I worked for." "And it did," I said. "But not only that." There was a long pause. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and this time there was no distance in his eyes, no judgment, no quiet dismissal, just realization. "I'm sorry," he said. 2 simple words, but they carried more weight than anything he had said all night. I felt something inside me shift. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. "I know you are," I replied. We stood there in silence for a moment, the city lights reflecting in the glass behind us. "I didn't mean to," he started then stopped. "To make you feel small," he finished quietly. I held his gaze. "You didn't make me small," I said. He frowned slightly. "But I tried to make you smaller," he said. There was no defensiveness in his voice, just honesty. And that mattered. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. He exhaled, the weight of that truth settling over him. "I thought I was helping you," he admitted, "helping you fit in." "I know," I said again. And I thought he hesitated. "I thought if you looked the part, people would respect you more." I smiled faintly. "And now?" I asked. He looked back toward the apartment, toward the people who had been listening to my story, asking questions, showing interest. "They already did," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "they did." He looked back toward the apartment, toward the people who had been listening to my story, asking questions, showing interest. "They already did," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "they did." Because respect, real respect, had never been about the dress. The rest of the night passed in a strange kind of clarity. Not the kind that comes from everything going perfectly, but the kind that comes when something hidden is finally brought into the light and can no longer be ignored. Michael stayed closer to me after that, not in an obvious way, not hovering, but present, aware, as if he were seeing me again for the first time. At one point, I caught him watching me while I spoke to a small group about the repair workshops. Not with embarrassment, not with impatience, but with something quieter, something thoughtful, and perhaps something like humility. Jessica joined us later, slipping her arm gently through Michael's. "I've been hearing amazing things," she said to me, her smile warm but genuine. "I had no idea you had such an impact." I laughed softly. "I didn't think of it that way," I admitted. "I was just trying to make things a little easier for people." "Well," she said, "it clearly mattered more than you realized." Her words echoed something Dr. Collins had said earlier, and slowly it began to settle into me. Maybe what I had done all those years ago hadn't been small. Maybe it had just been quiet. The party eventually began to wind down. Guests gathered their coats, exchanged final conversations, and filtered out into the night. Dr. Collins approached me once more before leaving. "I hope this isn't the last time we speak," he said. "I'd like that," I replied honestly. He nodded, then glanced briefly at Michael. "You have something very special here," he said to him. "Don't overlook it again." Michael didn't respond immediately, but he nodded. "I won't," he said. This time, I believed him. After the door closed behind the last guest, the apartment fell into a softer silence. Not empty, but reflective. Jessica began clearing glasses from the table. "I'll help," I offered. No," she said gently. "You've done enough tonight. Please sit." There was a kindness in her tone that hadn't been there before. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed it. Michael stood in the center of the room for a moment, as if unsure of what to do next. Then he turned to me. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded. We moved to the living room, sitting across from each other. The same space where just days ago I had felt so out of place. Now it felt different. Not because the room had changed, but because something between us had. I've been thinking, he began. I waited. He rubbed his hands together, searching for the right words. I spent so many years trying to get out, he said. Out of the life we had, out of the struggles, out of the feeling that we were always behind. I listened quietly. And somewhere along the way, he continued, I convinced myself that everything from that time was something to move past, something to leave behind. His voice faltered slightly, including you. The honesty in that sentence landed heavily between us. I didn't interrupt. I thought if I built something new, he said, something better, then I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere. He looked around the apartment, this place, this life. I thought this was it. And is it? I asked gently. He hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know anymore. There was no arrogance in his voice now. No certainty, just truth. I think he said slowly, I confused success with distance. Like the further I got from where I started, the more successful I became. I let that settle. And tonight I asked. He looked at me. Tonight made me realize something he said. The things I was trying to leave behind, they're the reason I'm here. I felt a quiet warmth spread through my chest. Not pride, not validation. Something deeper. Recognition. You didn't just survive all of that, he said. You turned it into something meaningful. And He stopped shaking his head. I made it sound like it was something to be ashamed of. I leaned forward slightly. Michael, I said softly, you were a child. You saw struggle. You wanted something different. That's not wrong. But the way I treated you, he said quickly. I held up a hand. You hurt me, I said honestly. He nodded, his eyes dropping. I know, but that doesn't mean you're beyond understanding, I continued. He looked up, surprised. It doesn't, he asked. No, I said. It means you have something to learn. There was a long pause. Then he let out a breath, almost like he had been holding it in for years. I want to do better, he said. I studied him. Then start by seeing things clearly, I replied. He nodded. I will. We sat there for a while, the silence between us no longer uncomfortable, just quiet. Then he said something that surprised me. Can I see it? He asked. See what? The cardigan, he said. I blinked. You mean the one I wore last time? He nodded. I want to understand, he said. There was something so sincere in his voice that it caught me off guard. I didn't bring it, I said. It's at home. He nodded slowly. Then next time, he said. Next time. The words lingered. For the first time in a long while, I didn't question them. Because they didn't feel like an obligation. They felt like possibility. Later that night, as I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the hesitation, the moment at the table, the dress, the recognition, the apology. It all felt like pieces of something larger. Something I hadn't fully understood until now. When I finally walked into my house, the familiar quiet wrapped around me like an old friend. I went straight to my bedroom, opened the closet, and there it was, the cardigan, waiting, unchanged. I reached out and touched it gently. You didn't need to change, I whispered. And for the first time, I realized something else. Neither did I. The days after the dinner felt unfamiliar, not because something dramatic happened overnight, but because something subtle had shifted and it refused to go back to what it was before. Michael started calling me. Not out of obligation, not quick distracted calls while doing something else, but real calls, intentional ones. "Hey, Mom," he said the first time, his voice a little hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" I smiled to myself as I held the phone. "I always have a minute for you." There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet exhale. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I'm starting to believe that." We talked longer than we had in years, about small things at first. The weather, my garden, Jessica's new project at work. But then the conversations began to deepen. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Collins said," Michael admitted during one call, "about your workshops." "Oh," I said. "Yeah," he continued. "I keep replaying it in my head, trying to figure out how I missed it, how I never really saw it for what it was." I didn't rush to answer. Sometimes silence gave people the space they needed, tense gave people the space they needed to understand themselves. I think he said slowly, "I didn't want to see anything that reminded me of that time." "That time?" I asked gently. "When things were hard," he said. "When we didn't have enough. When everything felt uncertain." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "That makes sense," I said. "But it doesn't excuse it," he added quickly. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." Another pause. "But it explains it," I continued. He let that settle. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it does." A few days later, he came to visit, unannounced. I was in the kitchen, standing over the sink rinsing vegetables for dinner, when I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, there he was. No suit, no polished shoes, just jeans, a simple shirt, and a look I hadn't seen in years. Nervous. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, glancing around the house. It hadn't changed much. Same furniture, same worn edges, same quiet history woven into every corner. "You kept everything the same," he said. I smiled. "It still works," I replied. He let out a small laugh. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it does." There was an awkwardness at first. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Like two people learning how to speak to each other again. I brought something, he said, suddenly reaching into a bag he had carried in. He pulled out a neatly folded piece of fabric. A cardigan, new, soft, carefully chosen. "I saw it and thought of you," he said. I looked at it for a moment, then back at him. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. But I didn't take it right away. I also wanted to see the old one, he added quickly. "If that's okay." I nodded. "Of course." I walked to the bedroom and opened the closet. My fingers brushed against familiar fabrics before finding it. The cardigan. The one he had once mocked. The one I had almost hidden away. I brought it back and handed it to him. He took it carefully, like it mattered, like it meant something. He examined it closely. The worn sleeves, the slightly faded color, the careful stitching where I had repaired it more than once. "You fixed this yourself?" he said. "Yes," I replied. How many times I smiled faintly. I stopped counting. He ran his fingers over one of the seams. "You didn't throw it away?" he said. "No," I answered. It still had life in it. He looked up at me. "And that's what you taught people," he said. "At those workshops." "Yes, that things aren't disposable just because they're not perfect anymore." I nodded. He swallowed. "I think I treated you that way," he said. The words landed softly, but deeply. I didn't rush to comfort him. Sometimes people needed to sit with the truth. I thought, he continued, that if something didn't fit the world I was trying to build, then it didn't belong in it. And now I asked. He looked around the room again, at the worn table, the old chairs, the quiet strength of everything that had lasted. Now I think I was wrong, he said. I stepped closer. Growth doesn't mean erasing where you came from, I said gently. It means building on it. He nodded slowly. I'm starting to see that. We spent the afternoon together, not doing anything extraordinary, just being, cooking dinner, talking, laughing at small things. At one point, he picked up an old wooden chair in the corner. This one's been here forever, he said. It has, I replied. It's a little loose, he noted. I know, I said. I've been meaning to fix it. He set it down carefully. Can you show me how, he asked? The question surprised me. You want to learn? I asked. He smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. I think I do. So I showed him, step by step, how to check the joints, how to reinforce them, how to make something stable again. He listened, really listened, and as he worked, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. The little boy who used to watch me in the kitchen, who used to ask questions, who used to learn not because he had to, but because he wanted to. This makes sense, he said at one point. It's simple, but it works. I smiled. That's usually how the best things are. When the chair was finished, he sat back and looked at it. It's better than before, he said. Yes, I replied. Stronger, he added. Yes. He looked at me then. And it didn't need to be replaced, he said. I held his gaze. No, I said. It didn't. There was a quiet understanding between us in that moment, one that didn't need to be spoken out loud. Later that evening, as he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. Mom, he said. Yes. Would you come by again? He asked. Not for a party, not for anything like that. Just come. I smiled. I'd like that, I said. He nodded. Then he held up the cardigan, the old one. Can I borrow this? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. For what? He hesitated. I have an idea, he said. I studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I said. As he walked out the door holding that worn, familiar piece of fabric, I felt something shift once again. Not a dramatic change, not a perfect resolution, but something steady, something real. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to change me. He was trying to understand me, and that was the beginning of something new. A week passed before I understood what Michael meant when he said he had an idea. It started with a phone call. Mom, he said, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and nerves. Are you free this Saturday? I think so, I replied. Why, I want you to come with me somewhere, he said. There was something different in his tone. Not just hopeful, intentional. Where are we going? I asked. He hesitated. It's a surprise, he said. I raised an eyebrow even though he couldn't see it. You've never been very good at surprises? I teased. I know, he admitted with a small laugh. But this one matters. Something in the way he said it made me pause. All right, I said. I'll come. Good, he replied quickly. I'll pick you up at 10. When Saturday morning came, I found myself standing by the window watching for his car. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. But there was a quiet anticipation I couldn't ignore. When he pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. He looked different again, not just in how he dressed, but in how he carried himself. Less rushed, less guarded, more present. As we drove, he didn't fill the silence with small talk like he used to. Instead, he let the quiet exist between us, comfortable, unforced. So I said, after a while, "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" He smiled slightly, eyes on the road. "Almost," he said. We drove past parts of the city I didn't visit often. Older neighborhoods, community centers, places that felt familiar in a different way. Eventually, he turned into a parking lot in front of a modest brick building. I looked at the sign. Westbrook Community Learning Center. I blinked. "Michael, come on," he said, stepping out of the car. I followed him inside. The moment I walked through the doors, something stirred in my memory. The smell of wood and fabric. The hum of quiet conversation. Tables arranged in rows. People gathered around them. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, a group of individuals, young and old, working with their hands. Repairing, mending, learning. I stopped walking. "Michael," I whispered. He turned to me. "I did some research," he said, "about programs like the ones you used to run." My chest tightened. "And I found this place," he continued. "They were struggling. Funding issues. Not enough volunteers. They were close to shutting down their repair workshop program." I looked around again, at the people carefully stitching fabric, at the tools laid out on the tables, at the quiet focus in the room. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a breath. "I partnered with them," he said, "helped secure funding, got them some new equipment. And," he hesitated, "and what I asked, gently. And I told them about you," he said. I felt my heart skip. "What do you mean?" "They've been looking for someone to lead the workshop sessions," he explained. "Someone who understands the philosophy behind it. Someone who doesn't just fix things, but teaches people why it matters." I stared at him. "Michael, I didn't promise anything," he said quickly. "I told them I'd ask you first." The room seemed to quiet around me. Or maybe everything inside me just grew louder. "You want me to come back?" I asked. "Only if you want to," he said. There was no pressure in his voice, no expectation, just an open door. "I thought about what you said," he continued, "about building on where you come from, about not throwing things away just because they're worn." He glanced around the room. "This place, it's doing exactly what you used to do, but it needs someone who truly understands it." I swallowed. "And you think that's me?" I said. "I know it is," he replied. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I had too many. Memories flooded back. The old community center. The faces of people I had helped. The quiet satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole again. The purpose I had slowly set aside, but because I had too many. Memories flooded back. The old community center. The faces of people I had helped. The quiet satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole again. The purpose I had slowly set aside without even realizing it. "I haven't done this in years," I said finally. "I know," he replied. "What if I'm not as good as I used to be?" He stepped closer. "Then you'll learn again," he said. "Just like you taught others to do." I looked at him. really looked at him. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about a workshop. This was his way of saying, I see you now. A woman approached us. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and steady hands. Are you Linda Harrington? She asked. I nodded slowly. I'm Karen Whitfield, she said, extending her hand. Michael told me a lot about you. I shook her hand. All good things, I hope I said with a small smile. The best things, she replied warmly. She gestured toward the room. We'd love for you to take a look around, she said. See what we're doing here. I walked through the space with her. She showed me the different stations: fabric repair, woodworking, basic electronics. Each one reminded me of something I had once taught, something I had once believed deeply in. We try to focus on sustainability, Karen explained, but also dignity, giving people the confidence to fix things themselves, to see value where others might not. I nodded, feeling something stir inside me. That's important, I said softly. It is, she agreed, but it's hard to teach that mindset. It requires a certain kind of person. She glanced at me. And from what Michael told me, you're that kind of person. I looked back at him. He stood a few steps away, watching quietly. Not pushing, not interrupting, just there. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, Karen replied. Take all the time you need. As we walked back toward the entrance, Michael joined me again. So, he asked gently. I took a deep breath. It feels right, I admitted. His eyes lit up slightly. But I'm scared, I added, of what he asked. Of stepping back into something I let go of, I said. Of finding out I can't do it anymore. He shook his head. You didn't let it go, he said. It just waited. The words settled deep within me. Waited. Maybe that was true. Maybe some parts of us never really disappeared. They just waited for the right moment to come back. I'll try, I said finally. A slow smile spread across his face. That's all it needs to be, he said. As we walked out of the building, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just hope, not just purpose, but renewal. Because sometimes the most important things in life don't come from starting over. They come from remembering who you were all along, and finally, allowing yourself to become her again. The first day I walked into the workshop as a teacher again, I almost turned around. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because something inside me whispered, what if you don't belong here anymore? The room looked different from the day Michael had first brought me. More organized, more alive, new tools neatly arranged, fresh materials stacked carefully on the tables. But it wasn't the space that made my heart race. It was the people. They were already there, waiting. Some sat quietly, hands folded in their laps. Others examined items they had brought: torn jackets, broken lamps, loose chair legs. Real things, real problems, real expectations. And suddenly, I wasn't just Linda Harrington, a woman with a past. I was Linda Harrington, the one who was supposed to help. Karen walked over to me, her calm presence grounding me. They're excited to meet you, she said softly. I hope I don't disappoint them, I admitted. She smiled. You won't, she said. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. It sounded simple, but I hadn't been just myself. I hope I don't disappoint them, I admitted. She smiled. You won't, she said. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. It sounded simple, but I hadn't been just myself in a very long time. Michael stood near the back of the room. He didn't step forward. He didn't try to guide anything, but he stayed, and somehow that gave me courage. I took a slow breath and stepped to the front of the room. "Good morning," I said. My voice felt small at first, but steady. "I'm Linda." A few people nodded. One older man gave a polite smile. A young woman in her 20s looked at me with cautious curiosity. "I've been told you're here to learn how to fix things," I continued. A few light chuckles broke the tension. "That's a good place to start," I said, "because so am I." That got their attention. I smiled gently. "I haven't taught a workshop like this in years," I admitted. "So today, we'll all be learning together." Something shifted in the room. The expectations softened, the pressure eased. And just like that, I found my footing. We started with something simple, a torn sleeve. I held up the fabric, showing the damage. The expectations softened, the pressure eased. And just like that, I found my footing. We started with something simple, a torn sleeve. I held up the fabric, showing the damage. "This," I said, "is what most people would throw away." I glanced around the room. "But what if it's not just fabric?" I paused. "What if it's something you've had for years? Something that carries memories, something that still has value, even if it's not perfect anymore?" The young woman in the front leaned forward slightly. "That's where repair becomes more than just fixing," I continued. "It becomes respect." I demonstrated the stitching slowly, not rushing, not trying to impress, just teaching, step by step. As I worked, I felt something return, a rhythm, a familiarity, a quiet confidence I thought I had lost. "Who wants to try?" I asked. There was hesitation at first. Then the young woman raised her hand. "I'll try," she said. I handed her the needle and thread. "What's your name?" I asked. "Emily," she replied. "All right, Emily," I said with a smile. "Let's see what you've got." She started carefully, her hands slightly shaky. "That's normal," I reassured her. "The first stitch is always the hardest." She glanced up at me. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because it's the moment you decide something is worth saving." Her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. She looked back at the fabric with a different kind of focus. As the session continued, more people joined in. A retired mechanic named George worked on a broken lamp. A single mother named Carla tried to repair a backpack for her son. Each story unfolded quietly, piece by piece, and with every person I helped, I felt myself coming back to life. Not the version of me that had been defined by loss or disappointment, but the version that had always been there underneath. The one who saw value where others didn't. At one point, I glanced toward the back of the room. Michael was still there, watching, not with guilt, not with regret, but with something softer. Pride. When the session ended, people didn't rush out. They lingered, talking, asking questions, sharing small victories. Emily held up her repaired sleeve. "It's not perfect," she said. I smiled. "It's not supposed to be," I replied. "It's supposed to be stronger." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand that now," she said. As the room began to clear, Karen approached me. "Well?" she asked. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "I forgot how much I missed this," I said. She smiled. "It shows," she replied. Michael walked over then. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me. "You are amazing," he said finally. I shook my head lightly. "I was just doing what I used to do," I said. "No," he replied. "You were doing what you were meant to do." The words stayed with me long after he said them. That evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I held the old cardigan in my hands. Michael had returned it earlier that day, carefully folded, clean, but still the same. Worn, mended, alive. I ran my fingers over the stitches I had made years ago. Each one told a story. Not of perfection, but of persistence, of care, of belief. And suddenly, I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. This wasn't just about teaching people to fix things. It was about reminding them and myself that nothing truly valuable is ever beyond repair. Not fabric, not furniture, not relationships. I leaned back in my chair, a quiet sense of peace settling over me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the past. I felt like I was building something new, something stronger, something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. It didn't take long before the workshop became part of my routine. Twice a week at first, then 3 times. And eventually, I found myself rearranging my entire schedule around it. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Each session brought something new, a different story, a different kind of damage, a different kind of healing. And slowly, word began to spread. More people started showing up, not just those who needed help fixing things, but those who needed something deeper, a sense of purpose, a place to belong. One afternoon, about a month after I started, Karen pulled me aside. "You've changed this place," she said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I just showed up." "That's exactly what changed it," she said. Her words stayed with me, because for years I hadn't shown up. Not fully, not as myself, but now I was, and people could feel it. That same afternoon, as I was helping George tighten the wiring inside his lamp, I noticed someone standing quietly near the doorway. A man in his early 40s, well-dressed, unfamiliar. He didn't approach. He just watched. At first, I assumed he was waiting for someone, but he stayed for nearly 20 minutes, observing, studying. Finally, when most of the participants had left, he stepped forward. "Are you Linda Harrington?" he asked. His voice was polite but direct. "Yes," I replied. He extended his hand. "My name is Dr. Daniel Reeves." The name didn't immediately mean anything to me, but something about his presence suggested significance. "It's nice to meet you," I said. "I've been hoping to speak with you," he continued. I glanced at Karen, who was now watching from across the room. "About what?" I asked. He smiled slightly. "About your methods," he said. "My methods," I echoed. "Yes," he replied. "The way you teach repair, the philosophy behind it." I felt a flicker of confusion. "It's not exactly a formal system," I said. "I just teach people to fix things carefully, with patience." He nodded. "That's what I observed," he said. "But it's more than that." I crossed my arms lightly. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer. "I'm a behavioral scientist," he explained. "My research focuses on resilience, how people recover from loss, failure, and emotional damage." I listened, unsure where this was going. "And over the past few years," he continued, "I've been studying the connection between physical repair and psychological healing." Something in my chest stirred. "I've visited programs across the country," he said. "Workshops, therapy groups, rehabilitation centers." He paused. "But what I saw here today was different." I felt suddenly self-conscious. "It didn't look very extraordinary to me," I said. "That's exactly why it is," he replied. I frowned slightly. "I don't understand." He looked around the room. At most places, he said, people are taught techniques, procedures, steps. He looked back at me. But you teach meaning. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'm not sure I follow, I said. When you asked that young woman why the fabric mattered, he said, you weren't just teaching her how to sew. I remembered Emily, her hesitant hands, her shifting expression. You were helping her assign value, he continued. Not just to the object, but to her decision to preserve it. I swallowed. I've seen that pattern before, he said. In studies. In controlled environments. He paused. But rarely in real life. And never this naturally. I didn't know what to say. I believe your approach has significant implications, he added. Implications? I repeated. Yes, he said. For therapy, for education, even for community development. Karen stepped closer now, clearly intrigued. What are you suggesting? She asked. Dr. Reeves turned slightly toward her. I'd like to document this program, he said. Study it. Possibly expand it. My heart skipped. Expand it, I said. Yes, he replied. With proper support, this could become a model used in communities across the country. The room felt suddenly smaller. You think something like this could go that far? I asked. I don't think, he said. I'm certain. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. You'd be the central figure in the study, he added. I shook my head immediately. I'm not a researcher, I said. I don't have a degree in anything like that. You don't need one, he replied. That's easy for you to say, I said quietly. He smiled gently. I understand your hesitation, he said, but sometimes the most valuable insights don't come from formal training. He looked directly at me. They come from lived experience. That word again, experience. All the years I had spent quietly repairing things, all the moments no one had noticed, all the times I had been overlooked. And now someone was telling me those moments mattered, that they meant something beyond my small world. I'd need time to think, I said. Of course, he replied. I'll leave you my contact information. He handed me a card. Clean, simple, professional. Whatever you decide, he added, what you're doing here, it's important. After he left, I stood there for a long moment, staring at the card in my hand. Karen broke the silence. Well, she said softly, that was unexpected. I let out a small breath. That's one way to put it, I said. Michael arrived a few minutes later to pick me up. When I told him what had happened, he didn't react with shock. He just smiled. I knew it, he said. Knew what I asked. That someone would see it eventually, he replied. I looked at him. You sound like this isn't surprising to you. It's not, he said. I've been watching you for weeks, Mom. He leaned against the car. The way people respond to you, it's not normal. I raised an eyebrow. I hope you mean that in a good way. I do, he said with a soft laugh. You're doing more than teaching them to fix things. I nodded slowly. I think I'm starting to see that. As we drove home, I held the card in my lap. Dr. Daniel Reeves, behavioral scientist, Research Institute for Human Resilience. It felt surreal, like something that belonged to a different life. Not mine, but maybe that was the point. Maybe I had been living a smaller version of my life for too long. And now, something bigger was knocking on the door. The question was I ready to open it? I didn't call Dr. Reeves right away. For 3 days, his card sat on my kitchen table, right next to my teacup, right where I could see it every morning, every afternoon, every evening. It became impossible to ignore. But it wasn't fear that stopped me. Not entirely. It was disbelief. The idea that something I had done quietly for decades without recognition, without validation, could suddenly matter on a national level felt unreal. Like someone had mistaken me for someone else. On the fourth day, Michael came by unannounced. He had started doing that more often, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. He found me sitting at the table staring at the card. "You're still thinking about it," he said. I didn't look up. "I don't even know what I'm thinking," I admitted. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. If someone else told you this story," he began about a woman who spent her whole life helping others, quietly building something meaningful, and then finally got recognized for it, "what would you tell her to do?" I let out a small breath. "That's not fair," I said. "Why not?" "Because it's easier to see clearly when you're not the one in the story." He nodded. "Exactly." I finally looked at him. "So, what do you see?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "I see someone who deserves to be heard," he said. The words landed softly, but they stayed. "I also see someone who's been underestimated for far too long," he added. I looked back at the card. Dr. Daniel Reeves, behavioral scientist. "What if I'm not what he thinks I am?" I asked quietly. Michael leaned forward slightly. "What if you're more?" he replied. That did it. That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatically, not like a sudden spark, but like a door slowly unlocking. Later that afternoon, I picked up the phone. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady. He answered on the second ring. "Dr. Reeves speaking." "This is Linda Harrington," I said. There was a brief pause, then warmth entered his voice. "I was hoping you'd call." We arranged to meet the following week at the Research Institute downtown. When I hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. This was real. There was no turning back now. The Institute was nothing like I expected. I had imagined something cold, clinical, intimidating. But when I walked in, it felt alive, bright, open, filled with people moving with purpose. Dr. Reeves met me in the lobby. "Linda," he said, smiling, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. He led me through a series of hallways, explaining things as we walked. Labs, observation rooms, data centers. But none of it overwhelmed me, because he didn't talk to me like I was out of place. He spoke to me like I belonged there. We entered a conference room with large windows overlooking the city. A few other people were already seated. "Linda, this is my team," he said. There were introductions, friendly smiles, no judgment, no skepticism, just curiosity. Dr. Reeves began by explaining the purpose of the meeting. "We've reviewed preliminary observations from the workshop," he said, "and we believe there's strong potential for a formal study." He turned to me. "But we want to build this with you, not around you." That mattered more than I expected. He continued, "We'd like to document your teaching approach, observe participant outcomes, and analyze the psychological impact of your methods." I listened carefully. "And what would that involve for me?" I asked. Initially, he said we'd attend your sessions, record them with permission, and conduct interviews with participants. He paused. "And with you?" I nodded slowly. "And later," I asked. Later, he said if the results are as promising as we expect, we could expand the program to other communities. The room was quiet. Everyone watching me, waiting. It felt like a decision point, not just for the study, but for my life. "I have one condition," I said. Dr. Reeves leaned forward slightly. Of course, this can't become something that loses its heart, I said. The words came naturally. This isn't about turning people into data points. I looked around the room. These are real people, real stories, real struggles. Doctor? Reeves nodded immediately. I agree completely, he said. That's why we want you leading it. I studied his expression. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just respect. Then I'm willing to try, I said. A small smile spread across his face. I'm very glad to hear that. The next few weeks were unlike anything I had experienced before. Researchers attended the workshops, quietly, observing, taking notes, sometimes asking questions afterward. At first it felt strange, being watched, analyzed. But something interesting happened. The participants didn't change. They still shared their stories, still struggled, still grew. If anything, they seemed more aware of the value of what they were doing. More intentional. Emily, who had once been hesitant to even pick up a needle, now helped others. George started bringing in extra materials to share. Carla began documenting her progress in a notebook. And me, I didn't try to perform. I didn't try to impress anyone. I just kept doing what I had always done. Teaching, listening, respecting the process. One afternoon, after a particularly powerful session, Dr. Reeves approached me. You see it now, don't you? He said. See what? He replied. I looked around the room, at the people still talking, still working, still connecting. Yes, I said softly. I see it. He nodded. And this is just the beginning. For the first time, I believed him. That night, I sat at home, the cardigan draped over my lap. I thought about everything that had happened, the years of being invisible, the moment Michael laughed at my clothes, the pain, the silence, and then the turning point. Not because someone suddenly changed me, but because someone finally saw me, really saw me. And in doing so, the years of being invisible, the moment Michael laughed at my clothes, the pain, the silence, and then the turning point. Not because someone suddenly changed me, but because someone finally saw me, really saw me, and in doing so, helped me see myself. I ran my fingers over the stitches again, each one imperfect, each one strong, and I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes the world doesn't recognize your value until you do. The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Plain envelope, no logo, no return address that meant anything to me. I almost set it aside with the rest of the mail. Bills, advertisements, things that could wait. But something made me pause. A feeling I couldn't quite explain. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper inside. As I unfolded the letter, my eyes skimmed the first line, and then stopped. Dear Ms. Harrington, we are pleased to inform you. My heart skipped. I read the entire letter twice, then a third time, not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to believe it. The research had been accepted, published, not just internally, not just in some small report, but in a nationally recognized journal. Dr. Reeves had mentioned it was a possibility, but he had never promised anything, and I hadn't allowed myself to expect it. Until now. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. All those weeks of observation, of interviews, of quiet, careful work. It had led to this. But the next line was what truly changed everything, and we would be honored to invite you as a keynote speaker at the National Conference on Community Resilience, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. A speaker, Me. For a moment, the old voice returned, the one I thought I had left behind. You don't belong there. That's for experts, for professionals, for people with credentials. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back on the table. My mind was already retreating, already trying to make the decision easier by saying no. Then, my phone rang. Michael, I answered. Mom, did you check your mail yet? He asked immediately. I blinked. How did you? I got a call from Dr. Reeves this morning, he said, his voice filled with excitement. He said the paper was accepted. I looked back at the letter. It was, I said softly, and he pressed. They want me to speak, I admitted. There was a brief silence. Then, that's incredible, he said. I don't think I can do it, I replied quickly. The words came out before I could stop them. Too fast, too automatic. Why not? He asked. Because I'm not that kind of person, I said. What kind of person? He challenged gently. The kind who stands on a stage and talks to a room full of experts, I said. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was different, calmer, stronger. Mom, he said, you've been standing in front of people your whole life. That's different, I said. No, it's not, he replied. The only difference is the size of the room. I closed my eyes. You don't understand, I said. Then help me understand, he said. I hesitated, then finally said it. I'm afraid I admitted. The word hung in the air. Simple, honest, real. Of what he asked softly. Of being exposed, I said. Of standing up there and realizing I don't belong. There it was, the truth. The fear that had followed me for years. Michael didn't interrupt, didn't rush to fix it. He just listened. Then he said something I didn't expect. Do you remember the first day you went back to the workshop I opened my eyes? Yes, you were afraid then too, he said. That was different, I repeated, though it sounded weaker this time. Was it? He asked. Or did you just decide that what you had to offer mattered more than your fear? I sat there in silence, because I knew the answer. He continued. You always told me something when I was growing up, he said. That fear doesn't mean you shouldn't do something, it means it matters. I smiled faintly. I did say that, didn't I? You did, he said. There was a pause, then he added more quietly. And you were right. The words settled deep inside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked back at the letter again, at the invitation, at the opportunity, at the fear. And for the first time, I didn't see them as separate things. I saw them as connected. Okay, I said. What? Michael asked. I'll do it, I said. The silence on the other end lasted just long enough to make me feel like I was in a movie, lasted just long enough to make me wonder if the call had dropped. Then, I'm so proud of you, he said. The conference was 2 weeks later. 2 weeks of preparation, of doubt, of rewriting and revising what I wanted to say. Dr. Reeves offered to help, so did his team. But in the end, I realized something. If I tried to sound like them, I would fail. Because I wasn't them. So instead, I decided to sound like myself. The morning of the conference, I stood backstage, the noise of the audience filtering through the curtain. Hundreds of voices, hundreds of people. Waiting. My hands were steady, but my heart My heart was loud. Dr. Reeves stood beside me. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "I know," I replied. "You just have to be real." I nodded. That I could do. When they called my name, I took a breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright. The room was larger than I had imagined. Faces blurred together in the distance. For a moment, everything felt overwhelming. Then I saw him, Michael, sitting near the front, watching me, not with doubt, not with expectation, but with belief. And suddenly, the room didn't feel so big anymore. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began. "My name is Linda Harrington," I said. My son once laughed at me for wearing old clothes. A ripple moved through the audience. Curiosity, confusion, attention. I didn't argue, I continued. I didn't defend myself. I paused. I just kept doing what I had always done. I looked out at the room, at the people who had come to listen, at the experts, at the skeptics, at the ones who didn't yet understand. I repaired things, I said, not because they were broken, but because they still mattered. The room grew quiet, completely quiet. And as I spoke, I didn't think about fear. I didn't think about belonging. I didn't think about whether I was enough. I just told the truth. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. When I finished speaking, I didn't realize how quiet the room had become. Not the polite kind of quiet, not the kind where people are waiting for you to finish so they can move on. This was different, still, heavy, present. I stood there for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the podium, unsure if I had said too much or not enough. Then slowly, someone in the front row began to clap. Just one person, then another, and another, until suddenly the entire room was filled with applause. Not loud in a chaotic way, but full, sincere, earned. I felt it in my chest before I fully understood it in my mind. They weren't applauding because I had impressed them. They were applauding because they had understood. I stepped back from the microphone, my heart steady now, in a way it hadn't been before. As I walked off the stage, Dr. Reeves was waiting for me. He didn't say anything at first. He just smiled. "You were right," he said finally. "About what?" I asked. "That it needed to keep its heart," he replied. I nodded. "I meant that. I know," he said, "and that's why it worked." Michael found me a few minutes later. He didn't rush toward me, didn't make a scene. He just walked up and hugged me, tightly, longer than usual. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words caught me off guard, for what I asked softly. "For ever making you feel like you weren't enough," he said. I pulled back slightly, looking at him. "You didn't make me feel that way," I said gently. I already felt it. He shook his head. "I made it worse," he said. There was no defensiveness in his voice, just honesty. Growth. "I should have seen you sooner," he added. I reached up and touched his cheek lightly. "You see me now?" I said. "That's what matters." He nodded, his eyes slightly glassy. "I do," he said, "and I'm proud of you." This time, I believed it, not because he said it, but because I no longer needed him to. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that day. There were still quiet mornings, still ordinary routines, still moments where doubt tried to creep back in. But something fundamental had changed. Not in the world around me, but in how I saw myself within it. The workshop continued to grow. More people came, more stories unfolded, more things were repaired. But the most important part wasn't the objects. It was the people. Emily eventually started leading her own small sessions. George began mentoring others. Carla enrolled in a training program she had never thought she was capable of before. And me, I kept showing up. Not as someone trying to prove anything, but as someone who understood the value of simply being present. The research expanded. Other communities began adopting the model. Dr. Reeves kept me involved in every step. Not as a subject, but as a partner. And every time I walked into a new space, a new room, a new group of people, I carried the same message with me, the one I had always believed, the one I had lived, and now the one I was no longer afraid to share. One evening, months later, Michael came over for dinner. Not for a special occasion, not for an event, just because. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had once stared at that letter, unsure of what to do. Now, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just conversation. Easy, natural. "Do you still have it?" he asked suddenly. "Have what?" "The cardigan," he said. I smiled. "Of course I do." I stood up and walked to the bedroom. When I returned, I placed it gently on the table between us. He looked at it for a moment between us. He looked at it for a moment, then picked it up. Carefully. Respectfully. This started everything he said. I shook my head softly. "No," I said. "It didn't start anything." He frowned slightly. "Do you mean it revealed something?" Then picked it up. Carefully. Respectfully. This started everything he said. I shook my head softly. "No," I said. "It didn't start anything." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "It revealed something," I explained. "Something that was already there." He nodded slowly. "I used to see this as old," he admitted. "And now?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Now I see it as proof," he said. "Proof of what?" "That something can last," he replied. "That something can be worn, repaired, imperfect, and still matter." I felt a quiet warmth spread through me. "That's all I ever wanted you to understand," I said. He looked at me. "I know," he said, "and I do now." We sat there in silence for a moment. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. Then he said something that stayed with me. "I think I spent so much time trying to build something new," he said, "that I forgot how strong the foundation already was." I smiled. "It's never too late to remember," I said. That night after he left, I sat alone in the living room. The cardigan draped over my lap. The same one. Still worn, still imperfect, still mine. I ran my fingers over the stitches one last time. Not because I needed to fix anything, but because I wanted to remember where I had been, what I had carried, what I had survived, and what I had become. Because in the end, it was never about the clothes, or the workshops, or the recognition. It was about something much simpler, something quieter, something stronger. Knowing your value, even when no one else sees it yet, and having the courage to keep showing up until they do. Life has a quiet way of testing how we see ourselves, not through grand failures or dramatic moments, but through small, repeated signals that whisper, "You are not enough." Sometimes those whispers come from the people closest to us. Sometimes they come from within. Linda's story reminds us that value is not something given by others. It is something lived, built, and carried over time. Every scar, every repair, every moment of endurance becomes part of who we are. And none of it is meaningless. We live in a world that often celebrates what is new, polished, and perfect. But real strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from persistence, from choosing to keep going, from choosing to see worth. We live in a world that often celebrates what is new, polished, and perfect. But real strength doesn't come from perfection. It comes from persistence, from choosing to keep going, from choosing to see worth where others see wear. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, this is your reminder. You are not behind. You are not outdated. You are not less. You are layered. You are experienced. You are built. And sometimes, the very things you've been told to hide are the things that will change someone else's life. So don't rush to replace yourself. Don't shrink to fit someone else's idea of value. And don't let the world convince you that your story doesn't matter. Because it does. More than you know. If this story touched you in any way, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated only to discover your worth later? Where are you watching from today, and what time is it there? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that matter. Sometimes the deepest wounds in life don't come from strangers. They come from the people we love most. A careless word, a moment of judgment, a look of disappointment. These things can stay with us far longer than we admit. But what this story reminds us is something powerful. Your worth has never been defined by someone else's perception of you. Linda didn't become valuable the moment others recognized her. She was always valuable. Her patience, her resilience, her quiet strength. Those things were there long before anyone applauded her. The difference is, she kept showing up even when no one noticed. She kept believing even when doubt whispered in her ear. And eventually, the world caught up to what had been true all along. Life has a way of testing whether we will shrink or rise, whether we will hide or stand, whether we will let others define us or finally define ourselves. And the truth is, many of us have something in our lives that feels worn, a past, a mistake, a limitation, or even a version of ourselves we've been taught to feel ashamed of. But what if those very things are not signs of weakness, but proof of endurance? Proof that you've lived, struggled, adapted, and survived. You don't need to be perfect to matter. You don't need to be new to be valuable. And you don't need permission to take up space in your own life. So, if you're in a place right now where you feel overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated, don't rush to change who you are just to be accepted. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay exactly who you are and keep going. Because one day, someone will see you clearly. And more importantly, you will see yourself clearly. And that will change everything. If this message spoke to your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever felt underestimated or overlooked in your own life? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you believe in stories that inspire strength, healing, and self-worth, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing journeys that truly matter.